Want to learn about public policy with a group of curious fellow learners? Apply for the 12-week graduate certificate in public policy. Early bird deadline closes 27th July.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Takshashila Institution's All Things Policy podcast. In this episode, myself, Jaison, and my colleague Bharath Reddy speak to Pranav Gupta, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of California, Berkeley, on initial findings from a survey conducted by the Center for Policy Research and Governance on AI adoption in India's higher education ecosystem. The study surveys close to 6,000 students across Delhi's universities and colleges to understand how AI is transforming higher education. We discuss the use cases for which students are increasingly turning to AI tools, but also the challenges arising out of ethical concerns, trust issues, and technical hurdles. We also address the future pathways of AI adoption in higher education and whether government policy interventions need to be considered. Listen in. Pranav, thanks for joining us on the All Things Policy podcast. Great to have you again here.
Thank you, Carl. Good to be in the podcast again. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. So as I'd mentioned in the intro, there was a very interesting study that's being done by the Center for Policy Research and Governance. The full study isn't out yet, but we have a SNAP survey or the results of that SNAP survey that's out. And that's basically around AI adoption in higher education. Bharath, what did you make of the survey in the first place before we sort of maybe turn to Pranav?
Firstly, as you would expect, right? So a lot of students have been using AI tools to help them with the studies, to either serve as a guide or generally to improve their learning outcomes and all of that. And that's on expected lines. But what you see is that there's a mix of people, how it's viewed. There's a mix of how helpful it is seen, how often it hallucinates. So different people have different opinions, how accurate it is. And so all of these, right? So these are maybe some things that we can dig into during this conversation and get Pranav's point of view as well. And then we have the larger question about what this means for education in general. How do educators cope with these changes? Should policy also kind of take this into consideration and adapt to this new reality, right? So those are some really interesting questions that are there, and we should get into this during the course of this conversation.
Yeah. Pranav, do you have any initial thoughts behind the survey? And what were your sort of takeaways, like broad takeaways from it?
So, Carl, like when we at CPRG thought of doing this survey, the basic idea that we had was like there's a whole discussion around, of course, students using ChatGPT, students using various kinds of AI tools. Like AI is now the new buzzword when it comes to edtech. But the idea was very simple to basically understand what is the ground level adoption of AI among students and how. So we have an idea that they're using it, but what we don't know is how frequently they're using it. What we have limited idea about is what are they using it for, and finally, most importantly, what do they feel about it? Like, is it actually helping them, and are they seeing both? And are they seeing visible change in their academic outcomes because of AI, using various kinds of AI tools, from ChatGPT to more specific customized tools?
So, Pranav, can you highlight some of the key takeaways? Like, what are the main findings of the report? Do students see that it's something that they can rely on? Is it something that's changing how they learn? And what were your findings as part of this study?
So I think I would say broadly the 3-4 findings which have kind of stood out for us. Number one is the idea that, of course, like in terms of frequency, yes, like almost 2/3 students use AI tools multiple times a week. out of these, one fourth are almost using it every day. So that which counts as pretty high usage based on any standards. Number two, what are they using it for? They're using it basically for helping in writing assistance, research. So which also means that one, it's primarily like social sciences students are using it for writing, students in engineering are using it mainly for helping in programming, etc. But then the second thing that kind of stood out was, what do they feel about it? Like how is it actually helping them? So what we found in the survey was, and this is pretty interesting, is like almost one fifth of students said that it improved their academic performance to a large extent, which in my mind is a significant proportion. And if you add some extent, that becomes almost to 60% students. So almost 6 out of 10 students are saying that AI tools are directly helping them improve their academic performance. It's not just limited to better understanding of complex subjects, better understanding of topics, or time management. There is actually some tangible outcome and improvement that they're drawing from AI tools. And then the third thing was that yes, there's high usage, there is visible improvement that students are reporting, but what is their overall experience like? So when you ask students about, okay, now you compare traditional teaching methods with AI methods, and especially in terms of engagement, most students still prefer traditional human interaction based learning. So, in that sense, what one could broadly say about the findings is that it's not that there's like this one sided view perspective on AI and everything is great with AI, and then there's a clearly strong preference for AI. Like everything else in the world, like there's some sort of the results increase some sort of a middle ground. Whereas, yes, students are excited about it, students think it's improving their outcomes, but at the same time, they do have some apprehensions and understand the limitations.
And during the study, did you also explore how the students were using it? Is it like you mentioned that they were using it for writing and for coding, but in what way were they? Any more details about how exactly they were using it, or are they being trained by the colleges on how to effectively use it? Is there something that the study gets into on this part?
Yes, so these were things that we covered more kind of qualitatively in terms of like alongside asking them some open-ended questions to just understand the usage more deeply. So in terms of tools that they're using, it's primarily LLM platforms, so ChatGPT, Perplexity, that's essentially what they are using. When it comes to writing assistant, it's essentially grammar check, it's essentially in terms of framing, improving the writing. And of course, at the same time, that also means that there might be many students who are just basically putting their questions, putting their topics on ChatGPT and using the output as is. But there again, what is happening is, and if you interact with teachers, is that now there's some sort of a sensitivity that is building even on the behalf of teachers. So in the sense that teachers are also now they are also more easily catching material which is directly taken from chat gpt, etc. So it's hard for students to just directly use the output.
Right. Pranav, I think what also stood out for me was that a large proportion of students actually cite barriers to usage, right? And this, I would imagine, pertains to maybe AI generating wrong information or misleading information. So, as you know, you surveyed Delhi University students who are scholars, pursuing research. To what extent did this seem like a challenge in the usage of AI?
See, when it comes to challenges in AI adoption, there are two kinds of challenges. So one is a challenge of general tech adoption or using tech, which is a challenge of limited access to internet compatible devices, etc., which is a challenge to a limited extent. There again, one has to be cognizant of the fact that this is a survey being conducted in Delhi. So, of course, the problems of digital access issues are going to be limited. So, it's
Yeah.
not something that can be generalized. But on the other hand, which is in terms of different types of challenges or constraints that students report with respect to the output that AI is giving, I think the mere fact that a substantial proportion of students recognize the problem of AI hallucinations is in itself good, right? Because what that means is that students are aware that the output that they're getting, the information that they're getting could be prone to inaccuracy, which means that they themselves are likely to be careful while using the output as is. So in that sense, yes, it's a barrier, it's a challenge that you can't completely rely on the output that you're getting. But the good thing is that students are more or less aware about this issue, which means that students would be careful while using the output.
Yeah. It's nice to hear that students are able to recognize the limitations of the technology. But did you get a chance to interact with the educators so that you could see if students are using it as a substitute for their own effort, or is it kind of complementing their effort and they're using it as a guide to be able to improve their learning outcomes? Any sense of how they, from the educator's perspective, they see?
So this is not from the survey per se or this study per se, but based on my own interactions with educators, with teachers on this topic, on this issue, and both in India and abroad. I think there's a confusion in terms of how they should approach, and they're reluctant to take a singular approach for various reasons. Number one, for a lot of tasks, teachers, researchers themselves are also using AI, right? Like researchers are using AI for programming, for writing code. So in which sense, in that sense, what they say is that if this is going to be the new normal, then what is the harm if students also use it? Number one. Number two, and the related challenge is that at the same that you want to encourage AI literacy, you want to encourage students knowing how to use AI tools, and at the same time you want to overcome the challenge of basically evaluation. Like how do you assess students, how do you evaluate work, how do you design assessments in this new AI based reality. So that's the challenge that educators, teachers are grappling with. And I can say this confidently that this is not a challenge which is unique to India or which is unique to any particular university. This is one area in terms of AI adoption where the challenges are essentially similar across the globe. Like in other domains, other fields, one could argue that adoption is less in some countries, more in some countries. The challenges are different, but here, more or less, the challenges are pretty much similar across the globe. Like, how do you balance the need to improve AI literacy and at the same time ensuring evaluation and assessment is fair and rigorous?
Right, Pranav, I think we have looked at some of the main findings from the report itself. And now, if we start looking at the big picture and what this means for education going forward or education policy. So, I guess one obvious thing is as students start using this more, will they become overly reliant on something like this, and will they offload their cognitive abilities to an AI tool? And in the long term, what would that mean for students who have gone through such an education system, at least during this transition, right? So where we have not understood the long term impact, and can we foresee the long term implications of this? And so, on a related note, maybe if you could answer this, and then I have another follow up question, so which I want to get to right after this.
So yes, that's an important question in terms of how does this impact student learning, how does this impact pedagogy, and more importantly, if we are imagining a new normal, a new AI-based normal, how does education system adapt to that? Now, I think what is primarily important is for us to, in some ways, preempt what is going to be the new normal or how industry is changing, how premium on various skills is changing, and then we have to work on the education system around that. So, for instance, if there are tasks which can be easily automated through AI, if there are repetitive tasks that AI can do easily, where AI efficiency is pretty high, we know that that's the direction industry is going to take. We know that then those are skills on which premium is going to go down, and which is why it makes absolute sense for even the education system to kind of adapt accordingly. So, for instance, writing basic code, if writing basic code is going to be done efficiently by AI tools, then that's the new normal, right? But at the same time, we have to realize that when we teach, we also have to give students the ability to do these things on their own, right? So, for instance, we all have and in some ways, it's the same calculator or computer debate, right? Like the entry of calculators does not mean that we stop teaching students how to do basic arithmetic, right? So similarly, when it comes to teaching, we will have to teach even tasks such as coding, programming, as with the assumption that suppose these tools don't exist, and at the same time prepare students or make them aware that when they would eventually do these things, a lot of those tasks, they would have tools that would do it for them. So that's the challenge. So where the primary challenge is to be able to preempt what are these skills which are going to get automated, where AI adoption is going to be extremely high, and where we can change the focus of the education system, where we can change the way skill training is given.
It's really interesting. So, like you said, some things are easily automatable or easy to offload to an AI, and what that means can be different things for different kinds of people, right? So, one thing I'm thinking of that is that it could become a leveler of sorts in the sense that some people who are lacking in basic skills like communication or being able to write clearly, for them this might be a big thing. So they might be able to analyze concepts and all that, but if they're not able to communicate, so this might give them good way to catch up with someone who's better at communication. But at the same time, if you maybe lack those foundational skills, how far can you go and build on more complex ideas? And these kind of they're really interesting questions to think about here.
Oh yes, absolutely. Because essentially, there's a fundamental question right there, right? Like, our skills that constitute foundational skills, is that also changing? Number one. Number two, there are foundational skills which are necessary for doing complex tasks, and there are foundational skills which are necessary for you to do anything. Now, a part of those foundational skills could become redundant, right? Because there are certain tasks which can be done automatically, then you don't need those skills per se. That's number one. Number two, what seems to be happening is that if certain basic tasks are getting automated, can be done easily, then the premium is also shifting more towards domain knowledge, because that, a lot of people still say, are things which can't be replicated easily. Like, for instance, understanding possible use cases, understanding where a certain tool can be used. Or I work in social sciences, so just in terms of still the idea of coming up with new ideas, coming up with new possible reasons for certain things, those are again things where performance of AI based tools is still limited. So, what parts where you can adopt these tools easily, or thing activities that they can do easily, could be in terms of, say, doing number crunching, doing statistical analysis. But what models to run, why should I run a model, or what I need to test, are not things which are getting replaced or which are getting automated relatively easily.
Yeah, Pranav, one of the, I guess, major concerns, from this study that, I could gauge was this is probably going to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And you did allude to this in your opening remarks about how this may not be a fundamental challenge in, let's say, the survey respondents that the study focuses on in this case, but it is likely to sort of accelerate that gap. And just to bring in the national education policy also here, which also mentions about the use of digital tech in education interventions. So where do you see this going from a policy program point of view, right? Where's the education sector heading, and what are the ways, if you can think of, by which we can maybe stem this gap, right, of this digital divide, which has always existed. Now with AI coming to the fore, it's certainly going to be amplified.
Not necessarily, because what we also know is that the digital divide is something that is contracting very quickly as well, right? Like, in terms of both access to laptops, computers, and access to smartphones, access to internet, are things which are which are continuing to increase. So the digital divide in terms of access to these technologies is something that is contracting now. And if that is happening, I think it's not such a big challenge, because when we think about these basic tools are like what a normal student is using, the normal student doesn't necessarily need a high power GPU or anything like that. Like what they need for their everyday purpose is a basic internet connection that allows them to use ChatGPT, Perplexity, or whatever. Right now, to use those tools, you don't necessarily need new hardware. You don't need you don't need fundamentally new or better devices. Existing devices that students are acquiring are good enough for those technologies, and we know that access to those technologies, those devices is also increasing. So I don't think it's as big a challenge as we might think about it.
Well, maybe coming to the close of what the things that we're talking about, right? So we've looked at the national education policy, which broadly mentions that integrating digital technologies into learning and teaching is something that should be done by the education institutions. But when you look at China and how they are approaching this, so the China's Ministry of Education recently released two guidelines on the use of Gen AI in schools. And that goes into a lot of detail about what educators need to be doing, how should students be using it, and this is starting from primary school onwards, right? So that is at the age of 6 onwards. So that's taking a very aggressive approach and going into something like this. But India's approach is, at least from the national education policy, is something very different. So do you see that there's a need for policy change to maybe adopt this or mandate adopting it, or do you think it should be left to the schools to whether how they want to effectively deliver the learning outcomes? What is your maybe take on this?
No, I think what you've pointed out is extremely important. And I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be something at multiple levels. And that is the way other countries are also doing it. So, what we need is, we at the national level, at the state level, at the system level, we need a broader policy on AI adoption in education. And this broader policy on AI adoption in education essentially focuses on this challenge, this twin challenge that I spoke about earlier. That how do you balance the objective of increasing AI literacy and at the same time ensuring proper rigorous assessment, evaluation, and fairness in the education system. So that's one part that requires a broader policy document, a policy at the national level, at the state level, at the system level. And then at the same time, we need are institutional level policies, which are more specific, which are based more on kind of specific situations that students might find themselves in. What is, for instance, like something as simple as what is fair use when it comes to using AI tools. Now, those are things which are hard to define at the system level. These are things which have to be defined at the level of the classroom, at the level of the course, at the level of the institution. So what you need is, one, you need a broader policy framework, a vision document that focuses on AI adoption in education. And this is, and not just China. Like for instance, the US came out with a small similar document, and this was issued by the president. It was issued by the White House. So similarly, one needs a broader policy document on AI adoption, AI vision in education, and then initiatives at the institutional level.
Yeah, Pranav, we would really look forward to the full study, coming out soon. But yeah, I think this was a great way for us to understand what are Indian, students, Indian researchers thinking about AI, their concerns around AI, and also its adoption at, the higher education levels. Thank you so much for this conversation, Pranav. We had it was great observations there, and I would strongly recommend folks to sort of catch hold of the report, study it as and when it's out. Yeah, unfortunately we couldn't link it to the show notes as it's not out yet, but yeah, we'll be sure to bring Pranav over for another episode, maybe where we can discuss this in a bit more detail.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Bharath.
Thanks. Pranav.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.